It was one of those November evenings where the cold just cuts right through you, the kind of night where you want to finish whatever you're doing and get back inside as fast as possible. That's exactly what Nina was thinking as she dragged 2 garbage bags toward the dumpster behind her apartment building. She'd been putting it off all day, but the smell was getting too strong to ignore. Nina worked as a nurse at the local hospital, pulling double shifts most weeks just to keep up with rent and her kids' expenses. She was exhausted, her feet hurt, and all she wanted was to get these bags in the dumpster and go back upstairs to check on her 12-year-old son Diego and 8-year-old daughter Lily. They were old enough to stay alone for a few minutes, but she never liked leaving them for long. She tossed the first bag into the dumpster with a grunt. As she lifted the second one, she heard something, a sound so faint she almost missed it. She stopped, holding her breath, listening. There it was again, a weak, muffled cry. Her first thought was a cat. The alley always had strays looking for food, but something about the sound made her heart skip. It wasn't quite right for an animal. She stood there for a moment, telling herself she was being paranoid, that she was just tired and hearing things. But the sound came again, weaker this time. Nina dropped the garbage bag and moved toward the dumpster. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating piles of trash bags stacked against the wall. She started moving them aside, her hands shaking now, though she couldn't say why. That's when she saw it, a tiny bundle wrapped in what looked like an old beach towel wedged between 2 bags, and it was moving. For a second, Nina couldn't process what she was seeing. Her brain refused to accept it. But then she saw the little face, barely visible in the folds of the towel, and everything clicked into terrible clarity. It was a baby. A newborn baby. Out here in the freezing cold. In the trash, she didn't think. She just moved. Nina grabbed the bundle and held it against her chest, her nursing instincts kicking in immediately. The baby was cold, so cold. The little lips had a bluish tint that made Nina's stomach drop. The umbilical cord was still attached, tied off with what looked like a shoelace. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, oh my God." The baby made another weak sound, barely a whimper. Nina ran toward the building, fumbling with her phone as she went. She hit 911 while kicking open the door to the lobby. "911, what's your emergency?" "I found a baby," Nina said, her voice shaking. "A newborn. She was in the trash behind my building. She's freezing and I think she's in trouble." The dispatcher's voice became urgent. "Where are you located?" Nina gave her address, already running up the stairs to her apartment. She couldn't wait in the cold lobby. The baby needed warmth now. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. Paramedics are on their way. Is the baby breathing?" "Yes, but barely." "She's so cold." Nina burst into her apartment. Diego and Lily looked up from the couch, their eyes going wide. "Mom." "What? Not now, baby. Get me blankets. All the blankets from your beds, hurry." The dispatcher was giving her instructions. "Keep the baby warm. Don't try to remove the umbilical cord. Check if there's anything blocking the airway." Nina did everything on autopilot, her training taking over. She wrapped the baby in her own jacket first, then in the blankets Diego brought. She could see the tiny chest rising and falling, but the breathing was shallow. Lily stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. "Is the baby okay, Mom?" "She's going to be okay," Nina said, trying to sound confident even though her own heart was hammering. "The ambulance is coming." The next few minutes felt like hours. Nina sat on the couch holding the baby close, trying to warm her with her own body heat. She talked to the dispatcher the whole time, following instructions, reporting every change. The baby's color was getting a little better, but she was so tiny and fragile. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved fast. They had questions. So many questions, but Nina barely heard them. She just kept saying she found the baby outside in the trash and that she didn't know anything else. They let Nina ride in the ambulance. She refused to leave the baby's side. The paramedics worked quickly, checking vitals, getting an IV started, keeping the baby warm. One of them, a young guy named Chris, kept looking at Nina with something like awe. "You saved her life," he said quietly. "Another hour out there and she wouldn't have made it." Nina couldn't respond. She just kept her hand on the baby's tiny chest, feeling it rise and fall, counting each breath. At the hospital, everything became a blur of activity. Doctors and nurses surrounded them. Someone led Nina to a waiting area while they took the baby to the intensive care unit. A social worker appeared, asking more questions. A police officer came too, needing a statement. Nina told them everything she could, which wasn't much. She'd heard a sound, found the baby, called for help. She didn't see anyone. The security cameras in the alley had been broken for months. The building manager was always promising to fix them but never did. "Do you have any idea who might have left her there?" the officer asked. Nina shook her head. "No, nothing. The towel was old and worn. There was nothing else with her, just the baby." The officer wrote everything down. "We'll investigate. Check the area, talk to neighbors. Someone must have seen something." But Nina barely heard him. She was thinking about that tiny face, those blue lips, that weak little cry. Someone had left that baby to die. Someone had walked away and left a newborn in the trash like garbage. She felt sick. The social worker, a woman named Patricia, sat down beside her. "The baby is stable now. She's going to be okay thanks to you. You did an incredible thing tonight. Can I see her? Soon. They're still running tests. But Nina, I need to prepare you for what happens next. This baby will need to be placed in protective custody. Eventually she'll go into the foster system unless we find the parents." Nina nodded, but something twisted in her chest. The foster system. She knew what that meant. She'd seen it at work, heard the stories. Some kids got lucky, found good homes. Others bounced around for years. How long will that take? Finding a foster home? Patricia sighed. "It depends. Could be a few days, could be weeks. We're always short on foster families, especially for newborns. They need a lot of care." Nina didn't say anything for a long moment. She was thinking about that baby, alone in the NICU. She was thinking about holding her in the ambulance, feeling that tiny heartbeat against her palm. She was thinking about Diego and Lily back home, probably scared and confused. "Can I visit her?" Nina asked. "While she's in the hospital?" Patricia smiled. "Of course. You're her hero. I think the nurses would love to see you." Nina went home that night after the doctors assured her the baby was stable. Diego and Lily were still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen from next door who'd come over to stay with them. "Is the baby okay?" Lily asked immediately. Nina pulled both her kids into a hug. "She's going to be okay. She's strong." That night Nina couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that little face, kept hearing that weak cry. She kept thinking about someone making the choice to leave a baby in the trash. What kind of desperation? What kind of fear? What kind of situation would make someone do that? But she also kept thinking about something else. About how it felt to hold that baby. About the way her heart had seized when she first saw her. About the fierce protective instinct that had roared to life inside her. By morning, Nina had made a decision. She didn't know if it was crazy or impossible. She didn't know if they'd even let her. But she knew she had to try. She was going to apply to become that baby's foster mother. She'd saved the baby's life once. Maybe she was meant to do more than that. Detective Lawrence Bennett had been working cases for 23 years, and he thought he'd seen everything. But when he walked into the hospital to check on the abandoned baby case, something felt off from the very beginning. The baby had been in the NICU for 3 days now. She was doing better, the doctor said. Her color was good, she was feeding. All her tests were coming back normal. The nurse who found her had been visiting every day, bringing tiny pink outfits and stuffed animals. It was a sad case, sure, but it should have been straightforward. Find the mother, figure out what happened, let social services handle the rest. Except nothing about this case was straightforward. Lawrence sat in the hospital cafeteria, reviewing the lab reports. Standard procedure was to run DNA tests on abandoned babies, enter them into the system, see if anything popped. Usually nothing did. But this time something had popped. Something big. The baby had a rare genetic marker. Not dangerous, not a health issue, just unusual. The kind of thing that shows up in less than 1% of the population. But here's what made it interesting. 3 separate genetic testing companies had flagged the baby's DNA. Not for health reasons, because it matched their databases in some way. And that was weird. Really weird. Lawrence had gotten his first call 2 days ago. A lawyer from some fancy firm in the city, asking about the abandoned baby case. How did they even know about it? The media hadn't picked it up yet. It was just a case number in the system. "I'm calling on behalf of a client who may have information about the child," the lawyer had said. All smooth and professional. "We'd like to discuss this matter privately." "Information about the child?" Lawrence had asked. "Like who the parents are?" "It's complicated. My client would prefer to handle this discreetly. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting." Lawrence had said he'd think about it and hung up. That same day, he got 3 more calls. Different lawyers, different firms, same basic message. They all had clients who were interested in the case. That's when Lawrence knew something was up. You don't get 4 high-priced lawyers calling about a random abandoned baby unless there's money involved. Big money. He'd done some digging. One of the law firms represented the Hartley family. Richard and Victoria Hartley, billionaires. The kind of people who owned half the commercial real estate in the state. He'd looked them up online, seen their perfect family photos, their charity galas, their museum donations. Why were they interested in an abandoned baby from a low-income neighborhood? Lawrence took a sip of his terrible hospital coffee and pulled out his notepad. He'd been a detective long enough to know that when rich people started circling something, it was either worth a lot of money or it was a threat to them. Sometimes both. He'd gone back to the scene, talked to everyone in Nina's building and the surrounding area. Nobody had seen anything. The alley was dark, the cameras were broken, and November nights were cold enough that people didn't hang around outside. Whoever left that baby had picked their spot carefully, or they'd panicked and gotten lucky. Lawrence's phone buzzed. Another number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but his curiosity got the better of him. Detective Bennett. Detective, my name is Harold Prescott. I represent the Hartley family. I believe my colleague reached out to you earlier this week. Yeah, and I told him what I'm going to tell you. This is an active investigation. I can't discuss details with random lawyers. Of course. I understand completely. But detective, my clients have reason to believe this child may be related to their family. They simply want to help. Lawrence leaned back in his chair. Related how? There was a pause. That's something we'd prefer to discuss in person. My clients are willing to fund the entire investigation, hire additional resources, whatever it takes to resolve this matter quickly and quietly. Quietly? This is a sensitive situation, detective. I'm sure you understand. The media, the publicity. It wouldn't be good for anyone, especially not for the child. Lawrence felt his jaw tighten. Mr. Prescott, if your clients know something about this baby, they need to come forward. That's how this works. We don't do secret meetings and private investigations. Think about it, detective. That's all I'm asking. My clients are very generous to people who help them. The line went dead. Lawrence sat there for a long moment, his coffee going cold in his hands. That had sounded an awful lot like a bribe. He'd been offered bribes before, but usually it was small-time stuff. A few $100 to look the other way on a traffic stop. This felt different. Bigger. He needed to talk to Nina. He found her in the NICU, sitting in a rocking chair next to the baby's incubator. She was reading a children's book out loud, even though the baby was too young to understand. The nurses had told him she'd been here every day, sometimes for hours. Ms. Torres? Nina looked up. She had dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't been sleeping. Detective Bennett. Any news? Can we talk? Somewhere private. They went to a small consultation room. Nina sat down, her hands folded in her lap, looking nervous. Have you noticed anything unusual? Lawrence asked. Anyone following you? Asking questions about the baby? Nina's face changed. Yes, actually. There's been a black SUV parked outside my building the last 2 days. And yesterday a man in a suit came to my door, said he was from some family services organization, asking about the baby. But when I asked for his card, he said he'd left them in his car and never came back. Lawrence nodded, his suspicions confirmed. Nina, I need you to be very careful. Don't talk to anyone about this case except me and the social worker. If anyone approaches you, call me immediately. What's going on? Who's looking for her? I'm not sure yet. But there are some very wealthy people interested in this baby, and I need to figure out why. Nina's hand went to her mouth. Is she in danger? No, nothing like that. But this case is more complicated than I thought. Have you applied for foster placement? Nina nodded. Patricia is helping me with the paperwork. But it takes time. Background checks, home visits, all of that. She said it could be a few weeks. Good. In the meantime, be careful. And if you see that SUV again, get the license plate if you can. Over the next week, Lawrence worked the case harder than he'd worked anything in years. He pulled strings, called in favors, pushed the DNA analysis through faster channels, and what he found made his blood run cold. The baby's DNA matched the Hartley family, not directly but through markers that suggested close relation. Someone in that family had a child, and that child was currently in the hospital NICU. But here's what made it even more complicated. The Hartleys had 2 daughters. Catherine, who was 26 and married to some tech entrepreneur, and Rebecca, who was 19 and supposedly studying abroad in France. Lawrence did some more digging. Rebecca wasn't in France. She was right here in the city, and according to her social media, which had gone completely dark 4 months ago, she'd been dating a boy her parents definitely wouldn't approve of, a scholarship kid from the public school, the kind of relationship that billionaire families tend to discourage. He tried to reach Rebecca. Left messages, sent emails, nothing. But he did manage to track down the boyfriend, a kid named Troy who worked at a coffee shop while going to community college. They met at a park. Troy was nervous, bouncing his leg up and down, looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to jump out at him. "I don't know anything about a baby," Troy said immediately. "Rebecca and I broke up months ago." "Why'd you break up?" "Her parents. They found out about us and threatened to destroy my future. Said they'd make sure I never got into any decent school. Never got a decent job. Rebecca told me we had to end it for my own good." "When was this?" "January. Almost a year ago." "Have you talked to her since?" Troy hesitated. "Once in June she called me crying. Said she'd made a mistake, that she missed me. But then someone took the phone from her and told me to never contact her again. Sounded like her older sister." Lawrence felt the pieces starting to fit together, but the picture they were making was ugly. "Troy, I need to ask you something important. Were you and Rebecca intimate?" Troy's face went red, but he nodded. "Yeah, a few times, but we were careful. She was on birth control." "Birth control isn't perfect." Troy's eyes went wide. "Wait, are you saying, is that baby? Is she mine?" "I don't know yet, but I need you to take a DNA test. Will you do that?" Troy sat there looking like he'd been hit by a truck, but finally he nodded. The test came back 3 days later. Troy was the father. Lawrence sat in his car outside the hospital staring at the results. A 19-year-old girl from one of the richest families in the state had gotten pregnant by a boy her parents hated. She'd hidden the pregnancy, somehow given birth without anyone knowing, and then left the baby in the trash? Or had someone else left the baby? Because the more Lawrence thought about it, the more it didn't add up. If Rebecca left the baby, why were her parents looking for it? Wouldn't they want the whole thing to disappear? Unless they didn't know what Rebecca had done. Unless Rebecca had hidden everything, and when the baby disappeared, the family had started looking for answers. Or unless there was something else going on entirely. Lawrence needed to talk to Rebecca. But every time he tried, he hit a wall. The family lawyers, the private security, the complete silence. The Hartleys had closed ranks. Meanwhile, Nina was getting closer to approval for foster care. Her home visit had gone well. Her kids were excited about having a baby sister. Everything was falling into place. But Lawrence had a bad feeling. The Hartleys weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. And when billionaires wanted something, they usually found a way to get it. It was a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Nina found the baby, when everything changed. Detective Bennett was at his desk, going through witness statements for the 3rd time when his phone rang. "There's a young woman here to see you," the desk sergeant said. "Says her name is Rebecca Hartley. Says it's about the abandoned baby case." Lawrence almost dropped his coffee. "Send her up. Right now." The girl who walked into his office looked nothing like the polished photos he'd seen online. Rebecca Hartley's hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. Her eyes were red and swollen like she'd been crying for days. She looked terrified. "Ms. Hartley, please sit down." Rebecca sat, but she couldn't stay still. Her hands twisted in her lap. She kept glancing at the door like she expected someone to burst through it. "I don't have much time," she said, her voice shaking. "My family thinks I'm at a therapy appointment. I have maybe an hour before they realize I'm not there. Rebecca, are you safe? Do you need help?" She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Safe? I don't even know what that means anymore." She took a deep breath. "That baby you found. She's mine. I'm her mother." Even though Lawrence had suspected it, hearing her say it out loud hit different. "Okay, thank you for coming forward. I know this must be incredibly difficult." "You don't know anything," Rebecca said, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. "You don't know what I did, what I became. Why don't you tell me?" And she did. The whole story came pouring out. Rebecca had met Troy at a community service event her parents made her attend for college applications. He was funny and kind and treated her like a normal person, not like a billionaire's daughter. They started dating in secret. Her parents would have lost their minds if they knew she was seeing a boy from public school. A boy who worked for minimum wage. A boy who didn't come from money. They fell in love the way teenagers do, fast and completely. And yes, they were careful, but not careful enough. In March, Rebecca missed her period. Then another. She took a test in a gas station bathroom, shaking so hard she could barely read the result. Pregnant. She couldn't tell her parents. She knew exactly what they'd say. They'd force her to end it, or they'd make her give the baby up for adoption to some appropriate family they approved of. And they'd make absolutely sure she never saw Troy again. So she didn't tell them. She didn't tell anyone except her older sister, Catherine. Catherine tried to help. She really did. She gave Rebecca money for prenatal vitamins. She helped her hide the pregnancy with baggy clothes. She covered for her when Rebecca had morning sickness. When their parents sent Rebecca to stay at their lake house for the summer, supposedly to focus on college prep, Catherine went with her. That's where Rebecca had the baby. In the bathroom of the lake house a week before her due date, when Catherine had driven into town for supplies, Rebecca had gone into labor alone, terrified and so much pain she could barely think. She bit down on a towel to keep from screaming because she was terrified the caretaker would hear. When the baby finally came, Rebecca was in shock. Physical shock, emotional shock, all of it. She cut the cord with kitchen scissors, tied it off with a shoelace, wrapped the baby in the first thing she could find, an old beach towel from the closet, and then something in her mind just broke. "I don't even remember making the decision," Rebecca said, sobbing now. "It's like I was watching someone else. Someone else wrapped up my baby and walked down to the back of the property and left her there by the trash area. Someone else got in the car and drove back to the city. Someone else showered and got into bed and pretended nothing happened." "You weren't at the lake house when Nina found the baby," Lawrence said carefully. "The baby was found in the city." Rebecca nodded miserably. I know. When Catherine came back and found out what I'd done, she completely panicked. She drove out there right away, found the baby. The baby was still alive, but barely. And Catherine made a choice too. Lawrence felt his stomach drop. What choice? She couldn't bring the baby to a hospital. Everyone would ask questions. Our parents would find out. So she drove to the city, to a neighborhood where nobody would recognize her. And she left the baby there behind that apartment building. She said at least there the baby would be found quickly. There were people around. Someone would hear her crying. "Your sister abandoned your baby in a trash area. She thought she was helping. She thought she was saving all of us. The baby, me, our family. She said we could move on, pretend it never happened, and the baby would be adopted by someone who could actually take care of her." Lawrence tried to keep his voice level. "And your parents? Where do they fit into this?" Rebecca's face went pale. Catherine told them. "A few days after you found the baby. She was falling apart, having nightmares, couldn't handle the guilt. She broke down and told our parents everything." "And what did they do?" "They hired lawyers. Private investigators. They tracked the baby through some DNA database they have access to through their biotech investments. They found out she was in the hospital, that she was okay. And then they started planning. Planning what?" Rebecca met his eyes. "How to get her back without anyone knowing what really happened. They wanted to control the story. Make it seem like I'd been mentally ill, that I'd had some kind of breakdown, that the baby had been taken from me. They were going to paint me as a victim and get custody of my daughter. And you? What did you want?" Rebecca broke down completely. I don't know what I want. I love my baby, I do, but I left her to die, Detective." "What kind of monster does that? What kind of mother abandons her own child in the garbage?" "A scared 19-year-old kid who was in way over her head," Lawrence said quietly. "A kid who needed help and didn't get it. That's not an excuse." "Nothing excuses what I did." "No," Lawrence agreed. "But it is a reason." "Rebecca, where's Troy? Does he know any of this?" She shook her head. "My parents made me break up with him. Threatened to ruin his life if I didn't. He has no idea he's a father. He has no idea about any of this. He deserves to know. I know. God, I know. But my parents will destroy him. They'll do it. They have the money and the power, and they don't care who they hurt." Lawrence pulled out his phone. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. Troy already knows. I tracked him down as part of the investigation. We ran a DNA test. He knows the baby is his daughter." Rebecca's face went white. "What, when? Is he okay? What did he say?" He wants to help. He wants to meet his daughter. But your parents have been blocking every attempt I've made to move this case forward. Rebecca stood up abruptly. I need to see her, the baby. I need to see my daughter. That's not a good idea right now. Please. Rebecca was begging now. Please, I need to see that she's okay. I need to see what I did, what I almost did. I need to understand what I'm fighting for. Lawrence thought about it. Thought about Nina, who was at the hospital right now like she was every day. Thought about that tiny baby, who'd been left to die twice by people who should have protected her. Thought about Troy, who didn't even know his daughter existed until a few days ago. Okay, he said finally, but we do this my way. And afterward you're going to talk to Nina. The woman who found her, the woman who saved her, the woman who's been visiting every day, the woman who wants to be her mother. Rebecca's face crumpled. She wants to adopt her. Yes, good, Rebecca whispered. That's good. That's what should happen. They went to the hospital together. Lawrence called ahead, arranged everything. Nina was in the NICU, holding the baby during feeding time. She looked up when they walked in and her whole body went tense when she saw Rebecca. Who's this? Nina, this is Rebecca Hartley. She needs to talk to you. Nina stood up carefully, cradling the baby against her shoulder. You're the mother. It wasn't a question, Nina knew. Somehow she knew. Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. Nina didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stood there protecting the baby with her body, looking at Rebecca like she was trying to decide something important. Do you want to hold her? Nina asked finally. I don't deserve to. That's not what I asked. Rebecca moved forward slowly. Nina transferred the baby into her arms carefully, showing her how to support the head. The baby made a small sound and Rebecca let out a sob. She's so beautiful. She is, Nina agreed. I've been calling her Hope Torres. I hope that's okay. Rebecca looked at the baby in her arms, her daughter, the child she tried to throw away. It's perfect. She is Hope. She survived because of you. What do you want to happen here? Nina asked. Because I need to know. I need to know if you're going to try to take her back. Rebecca shook her head. No, I can't be her mother. Not now, maybe not ever. What I did, what I'm capable of. I can't risk her like that again. But your parents want her. My parents want to control the narrative. They don't want her. Not really. They want to protect the family reputation. Nina crossed her arms. So what are you going to do about that? Rebecca looked down at the baby, at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and something shifted in her face. Something hardened. I'm going to fight them, she said. I'm going to tell the truth, all of it. And I'm going to make sure this baby gets the mother she deserves. The mother who's been here every day. The mother who loves her. She looked at Nina. That's you. You're her real mother. And I'm going to make sure you get to keep her. The war started exactly 3 days after Rebecca met Hope in the hospital. Nina got home from work to find a man in an expensive suit standing outside her apartment building with an envelope in his hand. Nina Torres? Who's asking? My name is Harold Prescott. I represent the Hartley family. I have a proposal that I think will benefit everyone involved. Nina felt her stomach drop. Detective Bennett had warned her this was coming, but she'd hoped he was wrong. I'm not interested in proposals. Please, just hear me out. 5 minutes of your time. Against her better judgment, Nina let him into the lobby. She wasn't going to bring this man to her apartment where her kids were. They stood by the mailboxes and Harold pulled papers out of his envelope. The Hartley family recognizes the incredible service you've done in saving their granddaughter's life. They're deeply grateful, and they'd like to show that gratitude with a financial gift of $250,000. Nina stared at him. You're trying to buy the baby? Not at all. This is simply a thank you for your heroic actions. In return, the family asks that you step aside and allow them to reunite with their biological granddaughter. Surely you can understand their desire to keep the baby in the family. Get out. Ms. Torres, please be reasonable. I said get out. That baby was left in the trash, twice. Once by her mother, once by her aunt. The Hartleys didn't care about her then, and they don't care about her now. They care about their reputation. Harold's friendly expression faded. You're making a mistake. The Hartleys have resources you can't imagine. If this goes to court, you will lose. Then I guess we'll see what happens in court. Now leave before I call the police. Harold left, but Nina knew it was just the beginning. She called Detective Bennett immediately. They offered you money? $250,000 to walk away from hope. Lawrence swore under his breath. They're desperate. Rebecca must have told them she's not backing down. What do I do? You fight. And you're not going to do it alone. I'm going to connect you with someone. That someone turned out to be a lawyer named Jennifer Washington who worked for a nonprofit organization that handled family law cases. She met Nina at a coffee shop the next morning. I'm not going to lie to you, Jennifer said after hearing the whole story. This is going to be brutal. The Hartleys have money and power and they're not afraid to use it. They're going to come at you from every angle. I don't care. Hope needs me. Okay, then we fight. But you need to be prepared for what that means. Jennifer was right. The Hartleys came at Nina like a hurricane. First, they filed an emergency custody petition, claiming that Rebecca had been suffering from severe postpartum psychosis when she abandoned the baby. They had doctors lined up to testify, medical records that had appeared out of nowhere, a whole narrative about a troubled young woman who needed her family's support. They argued that the baby should be with her biological family, while Rebecca received treatment. Then the pressure started on Nina personally. Anonymous complaints started showing up at her work. Claims that she'd been distracted on duty, that she'd made errors in patient care. None of them were true, but they had to be investigated. Her supervisor called her in looking uncomfortable. Nina, I don't know what's going on with you, but these complaints are serious. I have to put you on administrative leave while we review them. You know me. You know I would never put a patient at risk. I know. But I have to follow protocol. I'm sorry. Without her nursing income, money got tight fast. Nina had some savings, but not much. She started picking up food delivery shifts at night after Diego and Lily went to bed, just to keep the bills paid. Then her ex-husband called. They'd been divorced for 6 years and barely spoke, but suddenly he was concerned about their children. Nina, I've been hearing some things about you taking in this baby, about you being under investigation at work. I'm worried about Diego and Lily. There's nothing to worry about. Those complaints are false and you know it. Still, maybe the kids should come stay with me for a while, just until things settle down. Nina's blood ran cold. Someone got to you. How much did they pay you to say this? There was silence on the other end. Then, I'm just trying to do what's right for my kids. Our kids are fine. And if you try to take them from me, I will fight you with everything I have. But the hits kept coming. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Nina's life was under a microscope. They interviewed neighbors, showed footage of her apartment building, talked about the controversial foster care placement of baby Hope. The Hartleys' lawyers went on TV with their version of events. Rebecca was a victim of a medical crisis. The family just wanted to help their granddaughter heal from this trauma. They questioned whether a single mother working double shifts could really provide the care this baby needed. Nina tried to ignore it, but it was everywhere. At the grocery store, people stared. At Diego's school, other parents whispered. Lily came home crying one day because a girl in her class said her mom was a baby thief. I'm not stealing her, Nina told her daughter, holding her close. I saved her. There's a difference. Then why is everyone being so mean? Nina didn't have a good answer for that. The only bright spot was the internet. Someone had posted Nina's story on social media, and it had gone viral. People were outraged at what the Hartleys were doing. A GoFundMe appeared overnight, raising money for Nina's legal fees and living expenses. Within 3 days, it had raised over $1 million. People believe in you, Jennifer told her. They see what the Hartleys are doing and they're not having it. The hashtag that started trending was Let Nina Keep Hope, and it spread like wildfire. Celebrities picked it up. News anchors talked about it. Someone even started a petition that got 500,000 signatures in a week. But the Hartleys had their own plan. They did a tearful interview on national television. Victoria Hartley, perfectly dressed and perfectly composed, talked about her daughter's struggles with mental health. About how the family had failed to recognize the signs. About how they just wanted to make things right. We don't blame Nina Torres, Victoria said, her voice breaking at exactly the right moment. She did a wonderful thing saving our granddaughter. But Hope belongs with her family. She belongs with people who have the resources to give her everything she needs. It was a masterful performance, and it worked on a lot of people. The comments online became divided. Some people still supported Nina, but others started saying maybe the baby should be with her biological family. Maybe Nina was being selfish. Maybe she should think about what's best for the child instead of what she wanted. Nina read those comments late at night, lying in bed, exhausted from work and stress and fear. Was she being selfish? Was she doing the right thing? Then she'd remember holding Hope in the ambulance, feeling that tiny heartbeat. She'd remember visiting her every single day in the hospital, while the Hartleys did nothing. She'd remember Rebecca's words, "You're her real mother." She was doing the right thing. She had to believe that. Meanwhile, Detective Bennett was still investigating. He'd tracked down Catherine, Rebecca's sister, the one who'd left Hope in the city. She'd been hiding at the family's estate, protected by lawyers and security. But Lawrence got to her anyway. He was good at his job and he was motivated. He found her at a coffee shop of all places, having snuck out for an hour of freedom. "Catherine Hartley?" She looked up, startled. "How did you find me?" "I'm a detective. It's what I do. I need to talk to you about Hope." Catherine's face crumpled. "I can't. My parents, they're lawyers. They said I can't talk to anyone." "Your parents aren't here. And what you did, leaving that baby, that's a crime. You could be charged. But if you help me, if you tell the truth, I can probably keep that from happening." Catherine looked around nervously. Then she started talking. She told him everything. How she'd panicked when she found out what Rebecca had done. How she'd made the choice to move the baby to the city. How she'd convinced herself she was helping. And then, the part that made Lawrence's blood boil. "My parents knew," Catherine whispered. "They knew within 2 days where the baby was. They had investigators watching the hospital, watching Nina. They knew the baby was safe and recovering. But they waited. They planned. They wanted to control how this played out. They let Nina bond with that baby knowing they were going to try to take her away." Catherine nodded miserably. "They said it would look better if there was an attachment. Make it seem like more of a tragedy. Make people sympathetic to our family getting the baby back." Lawrence recorded every word. This was evidence. This was what they needed. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The judge would decide if Hope should stay with Nina or go to the Hartley family while the full case was argued. Rebecca showed up at Nina's apartment the night before the hearing. Troy was with her. Nina had met him once before, briefly at the hospital. He'd been nervous and overwhelmed, but clearly trying to do the right thing. "We wanted you to know," Rebecca said. "Tomorrow we're testifying on your side. Against my family. You're going to testify against your own parents? They're not doing this for Hope, they're doing it for themselves. You're the one who's been there. You're the one who loves her. You should be her mother." Troy nodded. "I want to be part of her life. I want to be her dad. But I'm 19, I'm in community college, I work at a coffee shop. I can't give her what you can. What Rebecca and I want is to be part of Hope's life. Maybe visits, maybe being like an uncle and aunt situation, but you should raise her." Nina felt tears welling up. "Your parents are going to come after both of you." "Let them," Rebecca said, and there was steel in her voice now. "I'm done being scared of them. I'm done letting them control everything. Hope deserves better, and so do I." The next day, they all walked into that courtroom together. Nina, Rebecca, Troy, Detective Bennett, Jennifer the lawyer. On the other side sat the Hartleys with their team of expensive attorneys. The battle was just beginning. But for the first time since this all started, Nina felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The courtroom was packed. Nina had never seen anything like it. People lined the walls, reporters filled the back rows, and cameras waited outside because they weren't allowed inside. This case had become national news, and everyone wanted to see how it would end. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and everyone stood. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. Nina had heard she was fair but tough. Today, she would need to be both. "This is a preliminary hearing," Judge Morrison said, "to determine temporary custody of the minor child while we await a full trial. Let's be clear about what we're deciding today. This is not about who will ultimately raise this child. This is about where she belongs right now, while we sort out the legal complexities of this case." The Hartley's lawyer went first. He was smooth and polished, laying out their case like he'd done it 1,000 times. Rebecca had suffered from severe postpartum psychosis. She'd been in no state to make decisions. The family wanted to help their daughter heal and raise their granddaughter in a stable, loving environment with unlimited resources. He showed financial documents. The Hartley estate, trust funds, private schools, everything money could buy. Then it was Jennifer's turn, and she didn't pull any punches. "Your Honor, this case isn't about money. It's about what happened to baby Hope and who actually showed up to save her. The Hartley family claims they want what's best for this child, but let's look at the facts. Jennifer laid it all out. How Rebecca had hidden her pregnancy out of fear of her parents. How Catherine had moved an already abandoned baby to a second location instead of getting her medical help. How the Hartleys had known where Hope was within 2 days but had waited, planned, strategized instead of immediately seeking custody. They waited because they wanted to control the narrative, Jennifer said. They wanted this to play out in a way that made them look good. Meanwhile, Nina Torres visited that baby every single day. She applied for foster care. She prepared her home and her children. She fought for Hope when Hope's own family was still deciding how to spin the story. Then came the testimonies, and that's when everything really fell apart for the Hartleys. Detective Bennett went first, presenting his investigation findings. The timeline of when the Hartleys knew about Hope. The phone records showing Catherine had called the family lawyers before calling anyone else. The evidence of their surveillance on Nina. Then Catherine took the stand. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her parents stared at her from across the courtroom, and Nina could see the pressure in every line of Catherine's body. "Tell the court what happened after you found the baby at the lake house," Jennifer said. Catherine's voice shook. "I panicked. Rebecca was unconscious from the trauma and blood loss. The baby was barely alive. I knew I should call an ambulance, but I was terrified of what our parents would do, so I wrapped her up and drove to the city. I found a neighborhood that looked busy enough that someone would find her quickly, and I left her there." "You left a newborn baby in an alley?" "Yes. And then what did you do?" "I went home. I told my parents everything, and they immediately started planning how to handle it." "Handle it?" "How to control the situation. They didn't rush to find the baby. They hired investigators to locate her first, to understand the situation, to figure out the best approach. When they found out she was safe and in the hospital, they discussed options for days before deciding to pursue custody. The Hartley's lawyer objected several times, but the damage was done. The judge had heard it all. Then Troy took the stand. He was nervous, gripping the edge of the witness box like it might float away. But he told his story clearly. How he'd loved Rebecca. How her parents had threatened to destroy his future if he didn't break up with her. How he'd only learned about Hope weeks after she was found. "What do you want for your daughter?" Jennifer asked. "I want her to be safe and loved. I want to be part of her life. But I know I can't raise her right now. I'm still figuring out my own life, but Nina can. Nina has been there from the beginning. She saved Hope's life, and she's been her mom ever since." Then Rebecca testified, and the courtroom went completely silent. She told the truth. All of it. The pregnancy, the terror, the birth at the lake house, and what she'd done afterward. She didn't make excuses. She didn't try to paint herself as anything other than what she was. A scared kid who'd made the worst possible choice in the worst possible moment. "I abandoned my baby," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "I left her to die because I was too terrified to face my parents and too overwhelmed to think clearly. That's the truth, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." "What do you want to happen to Hope?" Jennifer asked. "I want her to stay with Nina. Nina is the mother Hope deserves. She's the one who was there. She's the one who loves her without any agenda or need to save face. I'm not ready to be a mother. Maybe I never will be. But I can make sure my daughter has the best mother possible, and that's Nina." The Hartley's lawyer tried to redirect, tried to emphasize Rebecca's mental state, tried to suggest she wasn't competent to make these decisions. But Rebecca stood firm. "I know exactly what I'm saying, and I know my parents aren't doing this for Hope. They're doing it to protect their reputation and control the situation like they control everything else. Well, they can't control this. Hope deserves better." During a break, Nina watched as Rebecca approached her parents in the hallway. She couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Victoria Hartley's face go cold as ice. Saw Richard turn his back on his own daughter. Saw Rebecca stand there, shoulders squared, refusing to back down. When they returned to the courtroom, the Hartley's lawyer requested a brief recess to consult with his clients. When they came back, something had changed. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, and he sounded tired now. "My clients wish to modify their custody request. They're asking for supervised visitation rights rather than full custody, and they'll agree to allow Ms. Torres to proceed with adoption proceedings. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for silence. Is this accurate? She asked the Hartleys directly. Richard Hartley stood. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. Yes, Your Honor. My family has made mistakes in how we've handled this situation. We still believe we acted out of concern for our granddaughter, but it's become clear that Hope is thriving in Ms. Torres's care. We want to be part of her life, but perhaps we were wrong about what form that should take. It wasn't a full admission of guilt. It wasn't even really an apology. But it was surrender. Judge Morrison looked at Nina. Ms. Torres, how do you feel about this? Nina stood up, her heart pounding. I think Hope deserves to know where she comes from. I think she deserves to know her biological family, if they can treat her with real love and respect. But she's my daughter. She'll be raised in my home, with my values, and nobody is going to use her as a pawn ever again. The judge nodded. Then here's my ruling. Temporary custody remains with Nina Torres pending completion of the adoption process. The Hartley family will be granted supervised visitation, beginning with 1 hour per week, to be increased at the discretion of Ms. Torres and the court-appointed family counselor. Any violation of this arrangement will result in immediate termination of visitation rights. She looked around the courtroom. I want to be very clear about something. This child was failed by the people who should have protected her. She was abandoned twice. She nearly died. The only reason she's alive and thriving is because one woman cared enough to act. Ms. Torres, this court recognizes your extraordinary compassion and commitment. I'm approving your foster placement immediately, and I'll personally expedite the adoption proceedings. Nina felt her knees go weak. Diego and Lily, who were sitting in the front row, started crying. Troy put his head in his hands. Rebecca smiled through her tears. It wasn't over yet. Not officially. There would still be home visits and paperwork and final hearings. But the war was won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Nina gave one statement. Hope is safe. Hope is loved. That's all that matters. The Hartleys left through a side entrance, surrounded by security and lawyers. Nina saw them go and felt nothing but pity. They had everything money could buy and had lost what mattered most. Rebecca caught up with Nina before she left. Thank you. For fighting for her. For being everything I couldn't be. You can still be part of her life, Nina said. If you want to be. Not as her mother, but as someone who cares about her. I'd like that. When I'm ready. When I'm healthier. The door's open. For you and Troy both. 6 months later, Nina stood in a different courtroom for a different kind of hearing. This one was small. Just family and close friends. Judge Morrison presided again, and she was actually smiling. It gives me great pleasure to finalize this adoption. From this day forward, Hope Torres is legally and permanently the daughter of Nina Torres. Diego and Lily cheered. Troy, who'd been visiting regularly and had become like a big brother to all 3 kids, wiped his eyes. Rebecca, who came to visit once a month and was in therapy working through everything that had happened, took pictures.